right. Good evening and happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to the February session of our Female Leadership Series. The Women and Girls Task Force is incredibly excited for these monthly sessions, and we are so happy that you're all able to join us live tonight. My name is Janice Kugel, and I am the participation lead at Sport Nova Scotia. I'm also a rugby coach, an athlete, a board member, and like many of you, a female leader. I'm so honored to be the lead for the Women and Girls Task Force and the MC for tonight's event. And so excited to learn from our presenters this evening and in the coming weeks. In addition to Sport Nova Scotia, I'd like to thank the following partners who've helped shape this extraordinary event: the Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic, Support for Sport Nova Scotia Gaming, and the Government of Nova Scotia Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage. On behalf of the Women and Girls Task Force and our partners, I would like to acknowledge that our offices are located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are aware that there may be you participants joining from all over the world, and we welcome you to share where you currently reside. For the duration of the panel and our webinar portion, please turn off your camera and mute yourself to reduce any background noise and feedback during the breakout portion. During the breakout portion of the evening, we'll invite you to turn your camera back on if you're comfortable and in a space that you can, and unmute yourself. For the duration, please change your Zoom viewing to speaker view. This can be done by clicking the gallery view button at the top of your screen and changing it to presenter view. Please change your visible username to your full name, first and last name, as any coaches on the call will be eligible for PD points. Please direct any questions to the chat box. If you would like to speak out loud, simply use the raise your hand function or indicate so in the chat box. We'll be able to call on you when we have an opportunity to do so. If you would like to submit an anonymous question, please private chat a host. So you can see host myself and then host Kirsty Mason. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties at all or have any general questions, please message the hosts. We have over 100 people signed up for and registered for tonight's event. So as a reminder, please make sure to register for the event so that you get sessions. If you miss any sessions, they will always be recorded and posted on YouTube to view via private link. And this brings us to our next slide. Please actively participate in any polls. We want to know a little bit about you. So we would like to know today who is online with us and where you're joining us from. Please take a minute or two to select your role or roles and where you're coming from. If you are joining us from outside of Nova Scotia or outside of Canada, we also invite you to throw into the chat box where you are. We have lots of people from outside of Nova Scotia today. Great, so we're at 80% voted right now. Great, we got Ottawa. I live in New Brunswick, but coach in Nova Scotia. That's great. St. John's, Newfoundland. Renfrew, Ontario, just outside of Ottawa. Fantastic. Welcome, everyone. Sarnia, Toronto. Casey, you're bringing the Ontario crew. Alberta, wonderful. Nova Scotia, but in Gander. Chilliwack, BC. Oh my gosh, look, from across the country, coast to coast today. Fantastic. So we've got 40% of our folks are from the central region here in Nova Scotia. And our next biggest contingent is actually from outside of Nova Scotia tonight. We've got about 29% of folks today from outside of Nova Scotia. Super exciting. And then our most prominent role in sport is coach this evening at 56%, followed very closely by a volunteer at 39%. So that's fantastic. So I'll get Kirsty to close that. You can see those results there. Awesome. So thank you all again so much for joining us. Let's get started. I'm happy to announce that we have two fantastic, inspirational female leaders joining us this evening. And I will introduce them to you now. Alana Lieberman. Alana is our Safe Sport lead with Sport Nova Scotia. Welcome, Alana. Alana has a background as a competitive freestyle ballet skier, which is no longer a discipline. but she is also a lawyer by training with expertise in the areas of family, child protection, and constitutional law. Her goal as a safe sport lead is to work with key stakeholders in helping to create sport and recreation environments which are welcoming and inclusive and free from maltreatment. So, Alana, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you so much. For those of you, welcome to everyone, including all the people from all over. That's so exciting. I'm looking at my screen, making sure, and those of you who know what I'm talking about, hopefully will get a chuckle. I am not a cat. I'm live. If you don't know, then go on the internet. And there was this big kerfuffle. I don't know if it was yesterday or today where I don't know, some lawyer was a cat. And anyways, I am not a cat, I am live, and I'm excited to be here. And I'm super excited to introduce who I'm gonna now call my friend, Casey Liberon. We are colleagues for sure. We've actually never met in person as I started in January of last year, but Casey is the manager of sport community engagement at the CCES. And Casey and I have worked together probably close to a year now. Casey is a dynamic, incredibly inspiring, amazing facilitator. I could just go on and on and on about her sessions, and I think you're gonna just get so much of the next little while with Casey. I will let her do a little bit more of introduction about herself and the CCES and True Sport, and then I'm going to come back to you and talk to you a little bit about Safe Sport. So with that, Casey, I turn it over to you, and I'm excited to listen again to your amazing and inspiring presence.
Thank you so much, Alana, for the always overwhelmingly positive and accolade-filled introduction that you give me. So you're very gracious with your compliments, and I feel the same. I feel incredibly lucky to be here tonight. So thank you to Janice and the task force, and to Alana for setting this up and having us here. As Alana spoke to, it's been one heck of a ride working with the wonderful women in Nova Scotia around Safe Sport and the connection that they've seen and they've made to True Sport. And maybe I'll just start by framing exactly what I sort of mean by that when I talk about this, when Alana introduced us the CCES, and now we're talking to True Sport. So those of you on the call may be familiar with the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport as the organization who is responsible for administering the Canadian anti-doping program. So we have personnel all across the country who live in the hotspots for training for our high performance athletes who are responsible for collecting blood and urine samples to test for prohibited substances. So that is what we are more famously known for. But then we have a little department or a little shop within the bigger shop that looks at sort of that upstream approach to preventing some of those threats to sport. So doping being only one of them. And as Alana will get into later, I'm sure all of the other threats around maltreatment and the rest and violence in sport. We have a little group within the CCS called the True Sport team who are working to help instill the positive values that we all know and love in sport into the sport experience as an upstream preventative approach to those negative threats that we see that can trickle into community sport, amateur sport, and high performance sport all across the spectrum. So just wanted to give that framing. But again, thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to be a part of the discussions tonight, and I hope that you guys are here with open hearts and open minds, and that you want to share honestly and willingly, and know that your opinions will be respected. And without any further ado, I guess we'll jump right in. So we started off this session with a bit of an icebreaker, if you will. As I was speaking with Janice and Alana in the group and sort of how to bring this session together, they indicated that it was really important to have a networking component, that is a really big draw to these monthly sessions. And I thought, well, this is a great opportunity to host an exercise that has become very near and dear to our hearts, that has a beautiful tie-in with True Sport, but also offers an opportunity at the front end of a session for people to really get to know each other on a level that's connected through your values. So that is what we're here to do today, and that's how we're going to get started. So you will have seen that Janice had sent through this values exploration exercise in advance of the session. So you may have had a chance already to look through the exercise. You may have had a chance to already complete the exercise, which is wonderful. But I'll start off with just saying that, you know, we start this session talking about values and what are values, and we all have a little bit of a different definition or understanding of what that might be. But for the purpose of this exercise, we talk about values as signifying what is worthwhile to us. So personal values, of course, signifying what is worthwhile to you, yourself. And then values as a whole of, you know, what signifies value for a team, if we're talking about a sport context, or community, if we're talking about sport throughout a community. Values can be a judgment of what is important in life. And really, when we get down to the nitty gritty, sort of that lens or that guide that pushes us through every day. So sort of how we look at the world and how we prioritize what we decide is meaningful to us, and really something that guides through every encounter with another human being. And so we're going to start with that sort of commentary around what values are and what they mean. And as we continue on now, I think we'll have the opportunity to go into breakout groups. We'll have some reflection questions about the exercise that was given that we're hoping you can talk about in smaller groups. And really what we're hoping, again, is that you can come to the breakout sessions with this open heart, this open mind, and this willingness to share. And if it suits you and you are comfortable with that, the ask with this exercise is to use the answers that you came up with through this exercise to tell your group a little bit about yourself. So this first session, this first activity is really meant to be that icebreaker, that opportunity to do some networking, to start talking about really what's important to you. And then of course, it's only contingent upon your own willingness to share. So on that note, I believe you'll be set up in breakout groups, in small breakout groups. The questions will be provided in the chat bar. And I hope you enjoy the breakout session. Then we'll bring everybody back and we'll jump back into the exercise.
Wonderful. So you'll be invited momentarily to join a breakout room, and I will be sending and sharing the questions in the broadcast section of the breakout room. So you'll be able to see kind of, it pops up across the top of your screen. If you're not familiar, if you haven't used a breakout room before, they're little tiny words and they pop up at the top of the screen. So I'm going to stop recording and I will send you all to your breakout rooms.
For your participation. I was part of one of the breakout groups, and I really just felt like in those 5 or 10 minutes that we were in there that we had such opening conversations, and I felt like I got to know the few people in my group so well already. So I hope you all felt the same. I wish I could have popped in and heard all of the responses, because each and every time we do this values exercise, the conversation grows in a different way. I was giving a bit of an introduction into the group that I was a part of in my breakout room, that the first time we ever launched this activity was with a group of about 65 high school student leaders. And it was the first chance for all of them. Well, they indicated that this was the first opportunity that they had ever had, or sort of their first experience in sitting back and reflecting about their own personal values. So, you know, each and every time we do this exercise, depending on the age and stage in life that somebody is at, the conversation is so different. So in this particular context, it took 10 times longer for us to complete this exercise, because it literally felt like it was the first time that they had sort of sat back and reflected on what was important to them. Of course, we know they knew it, sort of when you think of it in the essence, but to put it down on paper and call it a value was the first time. So, and then as I experienced it in my breakout room, it seemed much easier for the two participants that I was with in my room to say, you know, I know myself, I know what's important to me, and these are the values that jump out to me. So just really rich, valuable discussions. And I really hope you guys enjoyed being a part of it. And I hope you got to know at least your small breakout room a little bit better. So we'll dive into the rest of it. Janice, if you could jump to slide 6. Oh yeah, this one actually is perfect. This is great. So now I want to dive into a little bit about, you know, we spent a little bit of time talking about personal values, and now we're going to speak to some common values that we at True Sport had done some research on to figure out, you know, what are there, and if there are, what are the common values around sport in Canada, and how might that drive sport in this country, and how might that ensure that sport in this country is living up to its full potential. So we start with this graph that might make your eyes go a little bit cross. Some people are graphical in nature in the way that they learn. Some people aren't. So rest assured, we have a little bit of mix of, you know, videos and graphics and words. So hopefully we hit sort of all the learning capabilities across the spectrum of participants that are here on this call. But I'd like to start with this one in particular because as Elena spoke to, the work that I at True Sport have been doing with Elena and the Safe Sport Working Group within Sport Nova Scotia, this slide really resonated most. And I don't know if any of you guys have had the opportunity to read the blog post that Elena wrote about that experience of working with us at the True Sport team and sort of the thinking that came about from this slide. But I'll start to dive into it a little bit here. So if you take a look at this slide and we start from a place of less sport to more sport. So that sort of diagonal line that cuts across the middle of the chart there. So we think about that as, you know, given the benefits that sport can have on a community, we at the CCS and True Sport believe that it should be available to all communities. So if there's something that is that powerful, that can do that much good for a participant and a community, the wish and the hope is that it's available to everyone to be a part of it. And then let's take a look at sort of that vertical line that goes from low use to high use. And what we mean by that is intentionality. So we talk about the cross-cutting benefits of good sport, community sport, and that they can be a clear invitation to sport leaders to use sport as an asset in community to do good things beyond just the obvious health and wellness benefits that we know sport can do. And if you're interested in reading up more on that, take a look on the True Sport website and have a read at the True Sport report, which is a dated report now and actually is in updates for sort of our 2.0 of the True Sport report. But what the True Sport report told us, an international literature review, was that sport, when done right, when values-based and principle-driven, has the opportunity to provide a wealth of benefits to society well beyond those health and wellness benefits. And that looks like increased participation for women and girls in sport, decreased crime in community, increased awareness and participation in environmental issues and standards. So, and the list sort of goes on and on and on, increased attendance at school and academic capability. So for all of those of us who know and love sport, we know these things to be true, but this report sort of outlined it all in one place. And then if we take a look at that last line on the chart there, and we talk about bad sport to good sport. And here's the crux of what the True Sport report told us, is that yes, sport has the power to do all of these wonderful things, to increase opportunities for excellence, to instill character in our kids, to strengthen our communities. But the caveat was, it has to be values-based. It has to be good sport. Not just any sport is going to do this for our communities. It has to be good. And the best way for us to do that is to be intentional about ensuring that our sport in our communities and our sport programming and our sport experiences for participants all across the country are embedded and infused with these positive values. And I guess the question that was asked to the Safe Sport Working Group when we first started working with them was, if we take a look at that spectrum of bad sport to good sport, and we think about the left side of the spectrum from bad sport when we talk about maltreatment in sport, an unsafe sport experience. And then we take a look at the other side of the spectrum around a good sport experience. So thinking about all those bubbles that you see on the right-hand side of the chart. The question I posed to the group at the time of our first session was, if we dot all of our I's and we cross all of our T's from a safe sport perspective, and we have all of those policies in place and we can ensure that it is not an unsafe sport experience. The question is the absence of harm in sport good enough? Are we okay with a sport experience that only stops at the absence of harm? So if it's safe, that's good enough for us. And I think the overwhelming response from Elena and her group of the Safe Sport Working Group was absolutely not. We need sport to be so much more than that. We want sport to be so much more than that. And how can we make that happen? And so we're going to talk about, the next slide is a little video, and hopefully the audio plays well, but I'll let it sort of speak for itself. Oh. Okay, great. I'm not sure if anybody heard the audio. I didn't hear the audio on my side. Did you hear it, Elena? No.
No.
That's okay. We can send the link after in the chat.
We will share the link.
In the chat box. That's okay. But to give a bit of a synopsis is that to that call of, is the absence of harm good enough? And the answer being no, the answer to that call that we have come up with at True Sport based on research and public opinion across the country from Canadians is this thing that we call True Sport. So now I'll dive in to tell you a little bit more about that, and we'll send you that video if it's something that you're interested in watching after. So when we talk about this notion of good sport, what is good sport? What does good sport look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? If I ask those questions here today, I'm sure that all of you on this call could say, that's why I'm here today. That's why I love sport, because sport is so good, because it can do so much good. It has the power to bring out the best in people, and it helps people discover their potential, whether that be physically, mentally, ethically, or socially. And often the response we get is, yeah, you know what? Good sport happens. It just happens on its own, naturally. And our response is, the answer is, all too often it does not. And that goes back to that intentionality piece. Sure, good sport can happen. We see it happen a lot. We see it when kids throw their sticks into the middle of the street and play a quick game of pickup hockey. But unfortunately, it's not always the case. If those children who are playing those games have witnessed their older siblings or other kids on the playground, or their parents playing in a way that emulates the pros, so to speak, or other negative behaviors, that game isn't always going to look the way we'd like it to, or the way we think a good sport experience should. And often the reason is because winning at all cost mentalities start to infiltrate the sport experience. So we lose that sort of fun natured experience of getting out there, having fun, doing our best. And oftentimes, too often, people are willing to cut the corners to get to that big W, to that big win. And if we flip to the next slide, you'll see what I mean by that. Unfortunately, when sport becomes bad, we start to see headlines like these, and they infiltrate our news feeds on a daily basis. It takes less than about 4 minutes to create this slide once we try to update it and make it more current with the times. And unfortunately, these are some of the things that happen when those winning at all cost behaviors take over. No matter how many good sports there are out there, and we know that sport can do good, the negative sports stories always seem to overshadow them. And this is what turns people off of sport. This is also why 70% of kids are dropping out of sport before the age of 13. You might say that the integrity of sport is fractured, and so parents are thinking twice about enrolling their kids in sport. Young volunteers in sport are not replacing older volunteers in sport. You may have recently seen that we teamed up with Sport Manitoba to talk about a campaign that we launched called No Ref, No Game, to really address the maltreatment of officials in sport. Who wants to be a referee in today's sporting culture? A 13-year-old who's out there sort of hearing it from all angles, from adults, from coaches, from players. Unfortunately, we have no shared agreement in the Canadian sports system around a common infrastructure and framework or foundation for sport. And as a consequence, we have a very patchwork, misaligned sports system in Canada, and Canadians are losing their trust in the sports system that we have. And unfortunately, when over time, those bad behaviors that we see can grow and spread across a sports system. And of course, I'm sure you guys can see the nod we're making to sort of the Lance Armstrong era. And when those pieces start happening, it starts growing across an entire sports system and infiltrating all levels of sport and society. Those are sort of those big threats that we're speaking to, that we talk about, whether those be doping or violence, harassment and abuse, poor parental behavior, weak sport governance, the leakage of those negative pro sport values into community sport, lack of access and inclusion, and the list goes on and on. These threats to sport can eventually emerge into some of those very serious ethical issues that I'm sure Alana is seeing all too often with her work in the Safe Sport Working Group. And unfortunately, they can have a tremendous impact on the legacy of sport. So there it is. And before I dived into our proposed solution, what I've just shared is really the why. Oftentimes people, especially if you're involved in sport and you love sport, you think, why the push to this? Why does this need to come top of mind? Why do we need to put so much emphasis on bringing something this to life? Like, this is just innate. This just lives in our sports system. And I guess if I really want to drive it home is to pull up some of the statistics when we really dug in and we asked Canadians what they thought about sport. Why do we need your help as coaches and other sport administrators to intentionally drive a sports system that is based on positive values? Well, the reason is because we have conducted in the past and continue to conduct public opinion research that talks about the fact that by and large, Canadians believe in the power of sport to have that positive influence on our communities. But unfortunately, less than 20% believe that the sport that we have is living up to that potential. So when we talk about this, we talk about the big gap between the sport Canada has and the sport Canadians want. And if we flip to the next slide, what that really tells us is that means that sport is never neutral. You know, there was another piece of that public opinion that we did, and it was one of the first interviews that I did when I joined the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport about 11 years ago. And it was polling Canadians about whether they would define their sport experience as largely positive or as largely negative. And I was absolutely floored as this young, eager, naive graduate coming into my first job in Ottawa in sport, that 50% of Canadians would describe their sport experience as largely negative. I just couldn't believe it. I was the phys ed kid. Sport was everything to me. I participated in high performance sport, every community sport I could get my hands on. And I just couldn't believe that 50% of people would think that sport could be so bad. So that leads us to the next slide, which talks to and speaks to the fact that why, yes, it's a powerful asset. Sport can be this very powerful asset to help us achieve so many of our societal goals, but sport is so vulnerable. It can have this overpowering positive impact, but it can also have these overpowering negative impacts. And we've heard it, I'm sure you've heard it as coaches, as teachers, as sport leaders, as parents in your communities. You know, if you think back to, I pulled this image to the run that the Raptors had. And even though that was a Toronto specific team, it felt like all of Canada was behind them in their run for the NBA championships. And if we take a look, that's that one opportunity at the highest level of professional sport and say, in that moment, it felt like all of Canada came together, you know, and we could talk about other examples. We could talk about the Olympics in Vancouver, if you're old enough to remember when Sidney Crosby scored that game-winning gold medal goal, and really what sport does to bring an entire nation together around sport. But if we stop and we think for one moment about what would we then feel like if it came back that there was harassment and abuse allegations for any or all of those players on those teams, if we found out that one of those players had tested positive for a doping violation, everything can come crashing down. Sport, of course, can be that powerful force to good, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we're always one scandal away from it losing its positive value entirely. That is why we need true sport, and that is why we need you to help us intentionally build it into each and every sport experience. So if we get to the nuts and bolts now of what is true sport. So I like to speak to this slide around the true sport values. We spoke to personal values at the front end of this conversation here today. But when we asked Canadians specifically, you know, if we wanted this good sport experience, what would be the values that would need to be at the center of this experience? And what they overwhelmingly told us was that it needs to be based on fairness, excellence, inclusion, and fun. And when we take a look at those values, we like to describe that as what is true sport? What is true sport is these four values. But when we're out there and we're trying to activate values, it becomes a little bit difficult to do. There's community values, there's personal values, there's team values, there's values from coast to coast, geographic, cultural, religion, however you define it. So we didn't want to have something where people felt like when they're speaking about values, they didn't necessarily see themselves in it. So if we jump to the next slide, what we did is we further articulated those values into 7 true sport principles. And these principles are actionable statements. So that's great to have values, that's great to have a philosophy, but how do we see it come to life on and off the field of play? So we took those values and articulated it into these action statements, talking about if participants, if coaches, if volunteers, if anybody who loves and supports sport and is involved in sport could really help bring these 7 principles to life, we think we would be that much closer to bringing about this type of sport that Canadians want. To define a little bit further what we mean by that and what that looks like, in the sport experience. If we flip to the next slide, we can think of those 7 principles as living in the circle called good sport, that circle that we talked about on that first graph. And we think about good sport as that white circle, and we think about those 7 principles ebbing and flowing in balance and proportion with one another. So we're not naive to think that any and all of those 7 principles are going to have the most equal and the exact emphasis on them at every given opportunity in the sport experience. That's absolutely not how it works. Obviously, at different parts of the game and the experience and your level and your involvement in sport, some of them are going to be emphasized while others won't be. But if we flip to the next slide, and what we see is sometimes what happens, and most times what happens, is that go for it principle, or excellence, or winning, or whatever you want to call it, that principle becomes so emphasized and so overdefined that there isn't room in the circle for any or all of the rest of the true sport principles. And in this particular example, that looks like stay healthy. And I have a really personal example that when I drew up this diagram to help explain that a little bit, it came to mind immediately. So in my past life, I was a high performance Taekwondo athlete. And I can vividly remember my coaches asking me before major competitions to dress in multiple layers of garbage bags and go running in a sauna in order to cut my weight class to make a different weight class for my competition, thinking that it would give me an edge on my competitors. And I think back to sort of what that meant to me as an athlete, what that meant to me as a female, what that did when I thought about my own body image. And I think about it now, and I think that is absolutely not the type of sport experience that we want, or that I would want to have for participants going forward. So that is what we're trying to steer clear of. And then lastly, if we just sort of, again, paint that picture to wrap it all together into one piece, and we talk about, if true sport is living here, if true sport is living there in your community, in your school, on your team, in your home, that's when good sport is going to happen. And when good sport happens, we see positive experiences. We see kids coming in with smiles on their faces and saying, we want to come back. That's how we get that retention and increased participation. When kids come home and they say, I loved that, take me back, I want to do it again, or I have so much confidence. I played on the soccer team, and hey, guess what? Now I'll try squash because I'm so confident in soccer. Why not try something else? That's where we see retention and we see increased participation. And when we have more people participating in more good sport experiences, we start to see the benefits of good sport in communities across Canada. And again, those benefits looking like the character that we can see in our children that come out of a good values-based experience, our communities coming together around sport, getting to know one another beyond the differences that we might have. And then of course, the increased opportunities for personal excellence, team excellence, or excellence as you define it for winning. It's all there. And those are all of the things that good sport can do. Now, what we thought to do is to, when we talk about all of these women and the potential that we have of coming together with all of our variety of background, like I said, just getting to know the few women that I did within my breakout room, I thought, wow, if this is just the tip of the iceberg of all of the people that are here on this call today and all of the influence that you all have within your own networks, harnessing the power of all of us coming together should just be absolutely exceptional. But I guess the question I wanted to end on was, what difference is it that you want to make in sport in your community? So the last exercise we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to think of the most influential role in your life to date. So the person you think, there's a typo there. I'm supposed to say role model. The person you think the most fondly of. So when we say role model, it could be coach, it could be leader, it could be family member. So I want you to think of someone who's the most influential, positively influential person in your life. And if it's sport specific, that's great. If it's not sport specific, that's absolutely fine as well. And I just want you to take a moment to write down that person's name. And I want you to write down what it is about them that makes you think so fondly of them. So it doesn't have to be a big paragraph. Just what is it about them that makes them come to your mind when you think of this very influential role model in your life? So we'll take a couple moments to do that. And then we're going to have an opportunity for you to participate in a bit of an interactive way.
Casey, do you see the whiteboard in front of you?
I do. Yes, I do.
Wonderful. So Casey's going to give you instructions on what in a moment, but if you look at the top taskbar of your screen, you'll actually see a more button, and you'll look for annotation. And annotation, if you've never used it before, will pull up a little tiny toolbar, which should have select, text, draw, stamp, eraser, undo, redo, and there's a clear button. Please do not hit the clear button because that will clear everything. But feel free to pick the text or the draw, and Casey's going to tell you what to do.
Great. Okay, so let me, Janet, am I okay to give a little, I can make a couple headings here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. All right, see if I can make another box now. Oops. I don't know, might not be so great at this. Oh, there we go.
It'll take a second for it to show up, but it's
perfect. Okay, so you probably know where I'm going with this, everybody. And then let's just maybe draw a little squiggler. How's that? I'm no artist, so I apologize in advance. But the question we're hoping for you to now participate in is, if you chose that thing that you said about that person that you wrote down that makes them so important to you, that makes you think so fondly of them, if it's something tangible, like they helped you achieve something, they helped you define a skill, they helped you achieve a result, they helped you achieve an award, something that's really meaningful, I would like you to put your note on the tangible side. And if it's something intangible, like and intangible, by that we mean the way they made you feel. If it's something about the way they made you feel about yourself, they helped you, helped me believe I could do something. Exactly that. If it's something about the way they made you feel, please put a marker on the left side there. So you can just put a dot, you can put a little heart, you can put a little line, however you want to mark it up. So right side tangible, left side intangible. Really intangible meaning the way they made you feel, and right side meaning some sort of result or achievement. Oh, I love it. This is working out perfectly, Janice.
Great, it looks super cool.
I want to give everybody the opportunity to share. So please continue adding your star, your heart, your arrow, your words. I love it. Inspired, had a positive attitude, helped me believe I could be amazing to be a leader, led by example. This is absolutely wonderful. Supporting, trusted, encouraged me. This is beautiful. And I'm sure at this point in time, you guys can understand where we're sort of going with this, is that, you know, there's a really powerful quote by Maya Angelou that says, people will forget what you said, what you did, but they'll rarely forget how you made them feel. And I guess at the end of the day, when we speak to True Sport and we think about safe sport and how that can intertwine and the difference that we can make and the power and the impact that we can have in a really positive way, if there's anything that you leave here today with sort of that inspiration or that motivation to participate in True Sport, to get involved, to learn about how you can bring it to life in your own network, the invitation is join us. You know, the province of Nova Scotia is doing wonderful things around their safe sport strategy and using True Sport as a really upstream positive approach to helping bring a lot of those safe sport components to life in a really meaningful way. And I'm so proud to be a part of the team. So the call to action is join us. There's so many great things that we can achieve together. So Janice, I think I can end there, trying to keep the timeline in focused.
Wonderful. We'll hand it back over to Alana.
There, I think I'm unmuted. Thank you, Casey. Again, every time I learn something new, I take something new with me. As Casey mentioned, when I started in January of 2020, I had done a lot of research. I had done what I call jurisdictional scans. I started looking at what's going on safe sport in our country, in our province, and other provinces, internationally. A lot of attention at that time, and still is focused on the Universal Code Against Maltreatment, UCCMS, and a lot of talk about maltreatment, abuse, harassment, and discrimination. And Janice, if you want to bring up that slide, that would be great. And so, you know, as the slide says, 2020, a lot of research went into that, and a lot of conversations with partners and stakeholders, you know, the CAC, the SDRCC, and then, you know, at one point, the Safe Sport Working Group, which started off as a task force and then became a working group. Kirsty is one of our members and the host here. And we had a conversation with True Sport. And as Casey mentioned, I personally had an aha moment, because what happened, and Casey talked about this continuum, and I did write an article, and it has reflected a lot of the work that has been done over the year. Is the absence of harm good enough? So is the fact that we don't have maltreatment in sport good enough? And that sort of aha moment, and talking with Casey, and sort of my values, my feelings, directed a lot of the work that we did, and in fact included putting something on our website, on Sport Nova Scotia's website, about safe sport. So yes, we want the absence of harm, the absence of maltreatment, but we also want that good sport experience. So the absence of harm is not good enough. And what really struck me when I was doing a lot of the research initially is that the word safe, when we talk about safe sport, means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It can mean welcoming, it can mean inclusion, it can mean belonging, it can mean fun. And so we want to make sure when we talk about safe sport, it's not just the absence of harm. Having said that, we have to deal with it, but we want to make sure that when we talk about safe sport strategies and when we talk about moving forward, we're talking about what safe can mean almost in a positive sense as well. So that's sort of what came of the conversations, or one of the initial conversations with Casey. Over the last year, and in the safe sport space, we also conducted surveys with our PSO partners, and some of you who are on this call or on the Zoom call were part of that. And we took that information and we said, okay, what have we learned and what are we going to do with that going forward? And so again, one of the first things was we need to put something about safe sport on our website. We didn't have anything at the time, and that was really important to me, and including and capturing what that meaning of safe was. We're talking about, and we're in the process of creating a policy suite for looking at minimum safe sport standards, including background screening, education and training, and safe sport policies, as well as an independent complaints process, which is taking up sort of the main focus, or one of the main focuses that I have right now is looking at that independent complaints process. We also, as a Safe Sport Working Group, felt it was really, really important to celebrate safe sport, to bring awareness to safe sport. So back to the slide, but you don't need to go back, Janice, was we created Safe Sport Month. And that was the first of its kind. We had 4 weeks of education sessions, which True Sport was part of. We had one on bullying. We had one, there was an introductory one, and then there was one on diversity and inclusion. And those were topics that sort of tried to bring in a number of aspects about safe sport that we wanted people to engage in. Again, some of you might have been on those calls or on those Zoom presentations. We actually created a Safe Sport website to host these webinars, to provide resources, and that's something we feel really strongly about. In addition, there is in Safe Sport Month, we launched it with a video campaign, and if you haven't had a chance to watch it, it's on our Facebook page, it's on our Safe Sport ns.ca website, and it's, you know, I don't take credit because I didn't really do anything other than just sort of stood in the background and watched in awe with some of our regional athletes and coaches, and it just is It's pretty amazing. And I think on Facebook, the last time I checked, it was close to 9,000 views, which I think is pretty important to get the word about safe sport out there so that we're talking about it. And so that really was the crux of this year. And as Janice has just said, we'll share the link with you. And so that was the past year. And again, a lot came from that conversation with Casey, and that that the absence of harm is not good enough. And so what can we do? What kinds of programs, what kind of exercises, what kind of further research can we do to continue that discussion? And if we go into what we're doing this year and beyond, ongoing education. So we recognize that a lot of safe sport education has been directed towards coaches. The CAC created a coaching module, a safe sport module. It came out, I believe, and it was April, and it's phenomenal. It's 90 minutes. If you haven't taken it, I highly recommend you do. And we recognize that that is really important in addition to a number of the other education components. What we also recognize is that there's not so much directed towards parents about safe sport. And what we really recognize in the Safe Sport Working Group, again, with Christy involved, who's on the call here, is one of the hosts, athlete education, making athletes aware of what's going on in safe sport, and engaging those athletes to come to the table to help us with the discussions, to find out what they know, what they don't know, what they want to know. And so really looking at a collaborative approach to our future education. I'm in the process with some people in government to create a policy suite, and that policy suite will be across all the PSOs when it gets done. As I mentioned, the independent complaints process is a big chunk of what we're working on now, and that is the sense and the chance for people to make complaints about maltreatment to an independent third party. It is my hope and belief that we will have that, the model, as soon as we can, and also put in supports in place. I really believe that's important too, if people are going through the system, that we have those resources and supports for them. So that's something that we're working on as well. And then we're also working on a tracking system, and a tracking system for the PSOs to house, I guess, their safe sports standards. So if we say, we're talking about, let's say, background screening or background checks, and we're looking at a matrix in terms of, if you are at this level, you need to get this kind of background check. How is that going to be housed, and where is that going to be housed? So we're working on that too, so the tracking system. So those are some of the really big pieces that we're working on. I'm very conscious of time and questions. And all I wanted to say, because I know this is when I joined this, and again, thank you, Janice, for asking me probably in March to join the Women and Girls Task Force. I joined the board part of this, and I wanted to bring it back to safe sport and inclusion from a board perspective. And I think there's two components here. The first being that we need to create safe and supportive environments for board members. And I think some of those values exercises and values discussion, and this is where it ties in nicely with Casey, can help foster those environments. So I think that is really important as we move forward in terms of creating safe and supportive environments. The other thing that I think is when we create the policy suites, against maltreatment and codes of conduct and things like that, it's really important that we adopt those policies as a board, but we implement them, and we implement them with meaning, and we implement them with training, and it's ongoing training. So it's not the current board gets the training and then that's it, but also, why are we getting the training? What is, we talk about, for example, I'm going to throw a term out there, the rule of two. But why are we doing that? And we need to start talking about the whys and changing the culture and changing that mindset, that it's not just training for the sake of training, but really going into the whys. And again, this comes back to the values. And I think that's really important. And, I know, I could listen to Casey, but I think having those discussions and the values-based discussions is so important when we move forward in safe sport in our province. And so again, I'm conscious of time and questions, so I will stop my little talk there and open it up.
Great. So if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself if you want, and we'll see that you've unmuted and you can ask your question out loud. You can type it in the chat for either Alana or for Casey to see, or if you'd like, you can feel free to direct message either myself or Alana or Kirsty with that. And if we don't get to your question right here live, we will certainly endeavor to get an answer from either Alana or Casey and forward that on to you folks. So we will open the floor to you.
I have a question if it's okay to ask it over the audio.
Absolutely, go for it, Amanda.
I was just wondering, Casey, you mentioned earlier that you come from a weight class sport. I think you said it was Taekwondo. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering what your guys' perspective is with regards to particularly young female athletes and participating in weight class sports. How do we do that correctly? Like, how do you provide inclusive opportunities, but their only competitive opportunity is directly related to a weight class?
Oh my gosh, Amanda, such a good question. I don't even feel like I'm equipped to answer it, to be completely honest with you. You know, I think back to the example that I gave, and it was just my own personal experience, but I don't even begin to understand all of the intricate pieces that come together, especially with coaching within a weight class sport, being mindful of all of those delicate components, especially when it comes to women and girls, especially when it comes to weight classes. But I guess the starting place, and maybe it's a good opportunity to announce that we have a program within the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport called Body Sense, Amanda, and it actually addresses issues like this specifically, but it is a very outdated program that we have at the CCS. So in 2021 and 2022, the new fiscal year, we are bringing together expert groups from all across Canada around these particular topics and these issues to revamp, to update the content of this program. So I don't want to stand here and pretend I'm remotely an expert and able to answer the question that you're posing, but just to say that there's resources coming. And I think this would be a great one. And I'm sure if there's others who can share other examples to help support and answer your question. But I guess just from a true sport perspective, that we're always just hopeful that people are even asking the questions that you are, that they're mindful of the values, the principles, the issues that exist, and, you know, asking for insight from the athletes and asking how they feel, how they wish to navigate it, how they wish to sort of proceed through the experience. So I'll stop there, Amanda, because I really don't feel like I'm expert enough to be able to answer your question specifically. But if you're interested, I would love to be connected, and I could keep you updated as the new Body Sense begins to roll out in the next fiscal year, because I think it would be really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I'm definitely interested in that resource for sure.
Hi. I'm wondering, how do you find for recreational outdoor sport so that during COVID that we can still offer some, like, for instance, coasting. Some people may not think of that as a sport, but it is an activity under a sporting line, for sure. Could take a child to a different area. How do you deal with the COVID things for outdoor sports right now?
Yeah, another good question, Jennifer. Again, I don't feel like it's my expert area to answer questions around COVID regulations, and it's not even a piece that I'm intimately familiar with right now, because I'm not currently coaching, so I haven't even had to deal with it. But I have been on a number of panel conversations where these questions and these issues are being talked about, and they are being sort of tousled around. And I know there's regulations, whether that be at sport council level, or those be at club levels, or provincial sport levels, or even public health guidance. I know a lot of teachers, phys ed teachers that we're working with, are rolling out sort of guidance and tips along those lines that might be useful. I'm not sure if Janice or Alana maybe are aware of some of that guidance within Nova Scotia's proper, if that's where you are. But if not, I do have links to a lot of sort of COVID regulations that we've been, like I said, that we've been a part of in terms of working groups that I would be happy to share back out with the group if you find them helpful.
Yeah, I'd love to see that it let, you know, to make it easier for them and let them know, like, you know, we can still go on and actively.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely share the resources that I'm aware of, Jennifer, and maybe there's even some provincial specific regulations and guidance that might be even more specific to your exact cause, if that's helpful.
And Jennifer, I've got a few Jennifers on the call. So if you want to just direct message me your last name or your email address, I can connect with you after as well.
Yeah, it's Jennifer Why Not.
Okay. If you registered with Jennifer Why Not, the email address, I'll have it.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question?
Yeah, Janice, I'd like to ask a question. Casey, I'm wondering at the national level, you know, it's interesting to think about it here provincially as well, but at the national level with issues like, you know, what you've shared here, 70% dropping out before the age of 15 and, you know, these lovely values that we'd like sport to be based around. Is there talk at all about the preparation and the training of coaches and leaders in our sport? Because it seems to me that that is a huge part of the problem that goes on with a lot of this, because we have people that maybe with the best of intentions, sometimes not, but that are leading sport that aren't aware of true sport, aren't aware of the rule of two, don't know about, you know, to follow up on Amanda's question, why it's inappropriate to poke someone and you're getting a little chubby there, you know, whatever it happens to be, the inappropriateness of some of it. But I think until we have far more structured training for coaches, for board members, for officials, for all, we seem to just turn it over to heartbeat and free time is what I say to my students all the time. Heartbeat and free time will let you coach.
Oh my gosh. And you just hit the nail on about 18 different heads there in that one question. So I hear you, I feel you. And I mean, when I spoke to that sort of patchwork and misaligned sports system, that is exactly what I was talking about. And so it's an uphill battle for us. It's networking, it's olive branches to people to work with us because we want to work with them, we want to help them. And I guess maybe the silver lining or the positive angle that I could spin on it is that COVID has brought so many, I mean, sorry, I'm narrowing in on because you said the national level. COVID has brought so many national sport experiences, sport organizations knocking on our door at True Sport to say, I hear you, I see you, I want this, we need this, how do we do it? So we have a number of national sport organizations who have come to the table and who have participated in what we're calling True Sport National Sport Organization Activation Session. So it's a workshop whereby they bring their staff to a 2-day workshop in this virtual format. It's been sort of like 3-hour sessions across 2 days. And we bring them in, we talk about it, you know, where are you at? Where do you want to go? Why do you see True Sport as a way of getting you there? And how can we help you do it by sharing things that have been done previously, and then talking specifically about like what is unique to you, your sport, and is there something new we can do together around True Sport? So I think I don't have the answer, Anne. I'm with you. I absolutely fully support you. But the breadth of our audience in True Sport, that's why it's so wide, right? Because again, that research tells us that we can't just narrow in on coaches and say, if we fix coaches, sport is fixed across the country, right? We're working with parents, we're working with schools, we're working with communities, we're working with officials. It's like, we got to hit them all. And we have this tiny team of 5, but I don't know, it feels good. It feels good this last year. Like COVID, like I said, has done so much, has harmed, or I guess has been so detrimental to so many people. But at True Sport, I feel like maybe it's given people that opportunity and to see that and to say, this is something that can rise to the top of the priority list. So
please keep up the good fight. It's a fight that's worthwhile. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So it's a perfect question and response to end on. So I just want to say, and I'm conscious of everyone's time, I want to say a big, huge thank you to Alana and Casey for their time this evening and for sharing those resources with us. We will forward those video links as well as a recording of tonight's session and some of those other links that both Alana and Casey talked about on tonight's session in our follow-up email. If you have any other questions that you didn't get the chance to ask, please send me an email, and I will be sure to include that in our follow-up. So I just want to end with a quick little reminder. We've got some upcoming sessions. Our sports series is divided into coaching and leadership. And next up on the 24th, we have our coaching on family and life balance. And then on the first Wednesday of next month, we have safe sport and inclusion from a board. It's not safe sport and inclusion. It's actually board basics coming up next. So we've got some really great sessions in the works, and we hope to see you all at some of them. So I just want to say once again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Keep up the amazing and inspirational work. Just for being on this call, you are all incredible leaders, and you're showing your importance to this in the sport. So a big, huge thank you to you all for being here tonight, and we will see you next month. Bye.